So we are going to get going, and the title of the section is called Interactions Among Living Things. Okay, so this is the third section of our chapter, and so we're going to be taking a look at how living things interact with each other. And to start with, we're going to talk about how organisms adapt to the environment. Okay, so each organism has its own set of unique characteristics. And they affect how basically that organism is able to survive. So it affects how the organism survives. Okay? And so it has to have a certain way that it is able to survive over that period of time. And so we talk about what natural selection is. So we introduce a term called natural selection. And natural selection is a characteristic that makes an individual better suited to its environment. And it may even become common in that species. Okay, so if we slow down for a minute and think, natural selection is a characteristic that makes an individual better suited to its environment. It may even become common in that species. It makes us think about the lab that we had just done, where you guys were collecting beans, paper clips, and the marbles. And each time that you would go and collect them, there were certain utensils, or beaks as we said in the lab, that were better suited to pick up certain things. So your hand was always naturally better at grabbing things because it had a bigger surface area. You were able to grab and close the different items. But then there were ones like the potential of a spoon that was able to collect a lot more marbles than probably the knife. And so we would say that the spoon is better adapted to be able to survive if its food source was the marbles, or if that was a type of nut that the organism was trying to go after. And so individuals whose unique characteristics that are best suited for their environment tend to survive and reproduce, which makes sense because it's going to be able to live there. It's not going to have to die or leave the area to find somewhere else to go. So we would say that it's going to survive and reproduce very easily. And we call these things adaptations. Which are behaviors and physical characteristics that allow an organism to live successfully in their environment. And so it's any type of behavior or physical characteristic that allows the organism to live successfully in their environment. That's what an adaptation is. And so that role that it plays to give it its physical characteristic or its behavior is called something known as a niche. And a niche is the role of an organism in its habitat. Okay, so it could be things like the food that it eats, or it could be how it obtains its food, or it could be which organism uses the organism for food. Or it could even be something like where it reproduces. And these are just a couple of the things that are involved in the niche. So basically, what does it do and what role does it have within its community? And every organism has a variety of adaptations to live in a community. Okay, whether it's its ability to get food, or whether it's ability to go after things, or its ability to hide from its prey, from the predators, if it's where it reproduces. So all of these things work together to keep the organism able to survive within its habitat. Now, that sounds all perfect and nice and a nice little fancy way of looking at communities, but there's a lot of interactions, okay? There are interactions that take place all day. And even into the night. Okay, so there are different interactions, and the title of the section is Interactions Among Living Things, and so some of the interactions of those living things, one of them is competition. The second one is predation. And the third one is called symbiosis. Okay, and so we'll look at each one of these a little bit more specific. All right, so organisms interact with each other through competition, through predation, and through symbiosis. So the first one, competition, is the struggle between organisms to survive. So they could be in competition over things like food and water, and space, or shelter. Okay, these are all things that they could be in competition for. And the reason for it is because of the fact that there are limited resources. Okay, so that's a lot of the reason why competition exists. Now, another type is predation. Predation is this idea or interaction in which one organism kills another for one of these reasons right here. Food, potentially water, shelter, or space. Most of the time, it's centered around food. Okay, so they're oftentimes going to kill one another for that. And the predation has two parts to it. One's called a predator. And a predator is the one doing the killing. And the other term is called the prey. And so the prey is the one that gets killed. And if you remember from our lab that we had seen, when we were looking at, from the previous section, when we were looking at the number of deer and the number of wolves, we had a large number of deer. And all of a sudden the deer population started to go down, and then it kind of leveled back off. And the wolf population, in contrast, started off where there was a low number of wolves, and that population started to go up, and then that population started to come down, and then they kind of leveled off. Well, what we notice is that when populations see a decrease in prey, the predators go up, and so the opposite occurs as well. And so generally, predator and prey are, they rise and fall in related cycles. So if this population, if the deer population goes down, we would expect to see that the wolf population would go up, and vice versa. So what our trend would be is that we would probably expect to see this start to come back down, and the wolf population would rise up, and so they'd always be opposite of each other. And eventually they come somewhat close to each other if the population is balanced because of the fact of our level of carrying capacity. And so that's an important understanding of predators and prey. And the last part of the note is called symbiosis. All right, benefit. So we're going to take a look at something that's called symbiosis. Symbiosis is a term in which there is a close relationship between two species that benefits at least one species. Okay, and there are three different types of symbiosis. There is what we call mutualism, which is where one species, actually, it's where both species benefit. Okay, so they both benefit from this. Another one is called commensalism. And this one is where one benefits and the other neither is helped or harmed. And finally, the last one is called parasitism. And this is where one benefits, but the other is harmed. And parasites are part of parasitism, and they are the organism that is benefiting while the host is going to be the organism that I should say that it lives on or in. And that is it for notes. So just kind of looking back at what we talked about, we started out by kind of establishing that each organism within its habitat has a certain way of surviving. It has a certain adaptation that allows for it to survive. And it's gained that through the natural selection of the organism. Each time that the organism survived, it got better suited to be able to live in that habitat or that environment. As the organism is in the habitat, it starts to have a niche, a role that it serves. And it serves many roles. It might be the fact that it goes and brings food back to the habitat, or it might be the fact that it helps protect the habitat. It might be something that it might be the food that it eats. It might be the relationship that it has with other organisms in terms of being the prey to other organisms. So each organism has a role within its habitat. And then we looked at how they actually interact with each other. And the way they interact with each other is through three ways: competition, predation, and also through symbiosis. And so competition, predation, and symbiosis are the three. And competition is this idea that they're struggling for the struggle between organisms to go after the same sort of resources. And so things like food, water, shelter, space are all examples of those. Predation is another way that they interact with each other. And so this is where one organism kills another. And so we introduced the terms predator and prey. We said that if you decrease predator population is going to go in the opposite direction and vice versa. Then we looked at symbiosis, and we said that there's 3 different levels of symbiosis: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Mutualism is where one organism and the other organism both benefit. They both have something that helps them in their relationship. Commensalism is where one benefits and neither is helped nor harmed, and parasitism is where one is helped and the other one is harmed. So that's it for notes. Finish copying these down, and you can switch over then to working on the textbook work. Make sure that you look up at the board, the front board, where you'll see that the homework assignment is written down along with the page numbers that you need to read and also the questions. All right, I will talk to you later.